She should have burned when the hollow rider came, but instead the fire awakened a scarred guardian bound to her fate. The fields had fallen silent long after the last song of harvest had drifted away. The laughter, the fiddles, the clapping of hands, all of it was gone, swallowed by the dark. Only the whisper of the wind remained, curling through the brittle stalks of grain. Alenya stayed behind when the others went home. She always stayed behind. Work filled the hollow places grief had carved in her. If her hands were busy, if her back ached and her arms stung from labor, then for a few blessed moments she could forget the fever that had stolen her parents in the spring. Her lantern glowed faintly at her side, casting a small pool of gold upon the furrows. She had knelt so long that the damp earth had seeped through her skirts. A lock of chestnut hair fell across her cheek, sticking to skin damp with effort. She brushed it back with a weary sigh and bound another sheaf of wheat with twine. The village lay beyond the fields, tucked in shadow. Somewhere a dog barked once and fell silent. The hush pressed against her until she could hear her own breath, uneven, catching at the edges. Her chest still carried that weight, the stone-heavy grief that never shifted no matter how she tried. When the bell tolled, she flinched. The sound rolled over the valley, solemn, unrelenting. 1, 2, 3. She froze, back straightening, dirt clinging to her hands. Her heart began to race as the sound climbed higher, beating into the night. By the time it reached 10, panic clawed at her throat. By 11, her hand had seized the lantern handle. By 12, too late, the flame still burned. Her stomach dropped. Every villager knew the warning: extinguish your lantern before the 12th toll, or the hollow rider will come. They whispered it to their children at bedtime, carved it into warnings on doorframes, left offerings at the shrine each autumn. It was not superstition, it was law, and she had broken it. The bell's echo died into silence. The ground trembled. At first she thought it was her imagination, but then it came again, steady and deep, the sound of hooves, slow, hollow, heavy as a funeral drum. Alenya turned, clutching the lantern to her chest. Its flame should have guttered, should have dimmed, but instead it flared brighter. The heat seared her palms until she thought her skin might blister. She tried to set it down, but her fingers would not obey. The fire had taken hold. Fog curled across the fields, rising swift and thick, swallowing the rows of sheaves. The air chilled until her breath smoked in the glow of the lantern. The hoofbeats grew louder. Then she saw him. The horse emerged first, black as iron, its hooves striking sparks from the stones. Steam curled from its nostrils, its eyes pale and glowing. Upon its back sat a rider, faceless, headless, his cloak snapping in the cold. Where his head should have been was only a hollow void, pouring smoke into the night sky. The lantern quivered in her grasp, flame blazing as though in defiance. The rider's voice scraped through the fog, sharp as stone grinding on steel. "The flame endures," he rasped. "It is mine." The horse charged, and Alenya's lantern blazed. She cried out, clutching it to her chest as the heat seared her palms. The flame did not die. It roared, alive, furious, spilling light so bright it tore through the fog. And then the fire moved. It burst outward in a storm of heat and light, tearing the mist apart. From within its blaze, a figure stepped forward. He was tall, shoulders broad beneath a dark mantle, his body marked by scars that gleamed red gold in the glow. Smoke drifted from his skin in faint threads, as if the forge still burned within his chest. His eyes, ember gold and unyielding, locked on the rider with the fury of fire chained too long. The rider's horse shrieked, stamping the ground. Fog coiled in fury. "You will not take her." The stranger's voice rumbled low, harsh, the words sparking with heat. The rider hissed, smoke whipping from the void where his head should have been. "You defy me again, keeper of the flame." The words chilled Alenya deeper than the fog ever could. She clutched the lantern tighter, though its heat seared her skin. The stranger spread his arm, stepping between her and the rider. Fire licked the dirt at his feet, burning a line into the earth. "Stay behind me." The rider did not vanish. He circled, his horse tossing its head, mist trailing like banners of shadow. He did not claim her tonight, not while this scarred guardian barred his way, but his presence pressed down on her with the promise that this was only the beginning. And though terror gripped her, Alenya obeyed. She stayed behind the stranger, watching fire and shadow square against each other in the mist. The hollow rider turned his faceless gaze upon her one last time. Then the fog drew him back into its depths, hoofbeats echoing as he retreated to wait, to hunt again. Alenya's chest heaved, her palms blistered around the lantern's handle. She should have collapsed in fear, but instead she found herself staring at the man of fire who had come from her flame. Something in him called to her grief, to the part of her that had been hollowed out for too long. She did not know his name. She only knew that she was no longer alone. And the hunt had only begun. The field smoldered with silence after the rider's retreat. The fog hung heavy, damp against Alenya's skin. Her hands throbbed from the lantern's handle, but still the flame burned steady in its glass, stubborn and alive. The man who had stepped from it stood in the churned earth, shoulders broad, scars glinting in the glow. Smoke curled faintly from his chest, and in the hollows of his eyes glowed a dangerous ember gold. Yet when his gaze dropped to her hands, to the lantern she clutched, something shifted in his expression. Shock, then disbelief. "You should be ashes," he said, voice rough as stone. "No mortal holds that fire and lives." Alenya's breath caught. She glanced down at the lantern, its glow still fierce, but her flesh, though scorched and raw, was intact. The heat had not destroyed her. His eyes narrowed, ember light flickering. He stepped closer, slow, as though approaching something impossible. "The flame chose you." His jaw tightened, unease cutting through his gravel tone. "It has never done that before." Alenya swallowed hard. "I didn't mean for any of this. I only lost track of time." His stare lingered, heavy, searching her face. "Time or not, the rider has marked you. And now," he exhaled sharply, almost like a growl, "now the flame has bound you to me." Her chest ached beneath the weight of his words. The grief that had hollowed her since spring pressed harder, but alongside it stirred something else, an ember of warmth, terrifying and strange. She whispered, barely audible, "What does that mean?" His gaze flicked to the horizon where the fog swallowed the last echo of hoofbeats. "It means he will come again. At dusk, at midnight. Until the blood moon fades, he will not stop. You should be dead, girl." His voice roughened, almost bitter. "And yet here you stand." The flame inside the lantern flared, as if answering. Alenya drew it closer to her chest, and though it scorched her palms, she held firm. Slowly, he extended his scarred hand, not to take the lantern, but to help her rise. She hesitated, then placed her trembling fingers in his. Heat radiated from him, fierce and alive, but she did not pull away. His ember gold eyes caught hers once more, and this time she thought she saw not only fire, but awe. "Walk with me," he said quietly. Not a command, an oath. "And perhaps you will survive the hunt." For the first time since grief had hollowed her out, Alenya felt the faintest pulse of something else. Not hope, not yet, but the dangerous spark of belonging. And so, with the lantern's fire between them, she stepped into the fog at his side. Dawn came thin and colorless, the kind of light that made everything look fragile. Alenya and Vaelric walked the field's ragged edge without speaking. The fog had thinned to tattered veils, and beyond it lay the stubble of harvested land, stone fences, and a dark line of forest shouldering the horizon. The lantern's flame burned steady in her hand, smaller by day, but alive, as if it merely waited for night to breathe again. They kept to hedgerows and sunken lanes. Birds returned to the air, cautious at first, then bolder as morning rose. Only then did she realize how badly her hands ached. The skin was reddened and split where the handle had seared her, yet when the light glanced off the burns, there was no char, no ruin. The fire had marked her without consuming her. Vaelric noticed the way she flexed her fingers. He slowed, then stopped in the shadow of a hawthorn. "Let me see." She hesitated only a heartbeat before turning her palms up. His fingers hovered above her skin, not touching, heat radiating from them like a quiet forge. "It should have killed you," he murmured, more to himself than to her. Then, lower, resigned, "It will try again." "Is that what you're bound for?" Her voice came softer than she intended. "To watch me burn?" He met her eyes. The ember gold there was not a blaze now, but a contained glow, unbearably wary. "I am bound to keep the fire from the rider's claim," he said. "If it chooses you, I am bound to you too." "Then you have a name," she said carefully, "for what you are." His mouth shaped a tired, almost bitter curve. "Names are for men. I am a vow, hammered and left in the heat." She wanted to ask more, but the wind shifted, carrying with it a smell like damp iron. He turned his head abruptly, listening to something she could not hear. "We move," he said, and they did. By day they covered distance, along the low stone bridges, through fields and pastures and the abandoned orchard where red fruit had fallen and split. On a ridge they paused to look back. The valley lay quiet, but a darker bruise of mist pooled where she had worked the night before, as if the place remembered hoofbeats. Near noon she faltered. He said nothing, only adjusted his pace to hers, a big shadow beside her, his heat a steady pressure against the chill. Once, when she stumbled, his hand closed around her elbow to steady her. The contact was brief, careful, as if he feared he might scorch her. The spot his skin had touched tingled long after he released her. They came to the edge of the forest at dusk. The trees rose like a wall, trunks silver gray, the understory dense with bracken and the last of summer's leaves going brittle at the edges. The light thinned beneath the canopy. A hush settled that was not the hush of birds roosting, but something watchful and old. The lantern stirred in her hand, not brighter, but alert. "We shouldn't go in," she whispered. "We won't, not yet." He scanned the tree line, scars catching what little light remained. "He likes you to think there are places he will not go. Then he waits where you feel safest." His mouth hardened. "He favors edges." They made camp in a hollow where the forest gave way to a slope. No fire. She had the lantern. He gathered stones with deliberate hands and set them in a ring as if that would slow a thing born of shadow. She watched his movements, economical and wary. When he shrugged his mantle aside, she saw the long, ridged scar that scored his shoulder, the puckered burns across his ribs. It was not a soldier's tally, nor a beast's claws. It was the map of a man who had stood too long between fire and night. "Does it hurt?" she asked before she could swallow the words. His gaze flicked to her. For a heartbeat, he said nothing. Then, "Only when it remembers being a man." The lantern's flame shifted, a small lean toward him. She drew in a shaky breath. "Let me help." He almost refused. She saw the refusal rise, pride or habit, but then it broke against something in him she could not name. He sat and let her kneel close, the lantern between them. She tore strips from her hem and dipped them in water from her flask, laying them cool along the worst of the burns. His heat dried them quickly. She changed them again. His chest rose and fell, steady at first, then hitching faintly when her fingers brushed a tender place. She glanced up, apology on her tongue, and found his eyes already on her. The ember there was not so wary now. Not warm exactly. Cuttingly intent. A beat passed that felt longer than the day they had walked. She dared a smile, weak but real. "If I'm to keep tending you, I can't keep calling you keeper or stranger. You must have a name." He went very still. The lantern's flame crackled faintly, as if listening. At last he said, low and grudging, "Vaelric." The syllables carried weight, as though dragged up from stone and ash. "Long ago it meant something. Now it binds me more than frees me." "Vaelric," she repeated softly, testing it on her tongue. For a moment, something in his ember-gold eyes shifted, as though hearing it from her lips made the name less a burden and more a vow. He looked away first. "Night comes," he said, rougher than before. "He will test us." The test began with the wind. It came down the slope in a long, low breath, lifting the hair on her arms, rippling the leaves so softly she might have missed it, if not for the way the lantern responded. Its flame narrowed, brightened, then flared in a sharp, warning lick. The horses she had not heard, because there had been only one, now sounded everywhere, hoofbeats layered and echoing until the ground hummed. "Stand," Vaelric said, and took his place between her and the dark line of trees. Mist thickened at the forest's mouth, rolling out across the slope in a slow tide. Out of it came the horse, black and gleaming, breath smoking. The rider sat taller than memory, his cloak a living shroud, the void where his head should have been drunk on darkness. The air around him dropped to a bitter cold that clamped Alenya's breath tight in her chest. "The flame endures," he rasped, and the leaves shivered. "It was promised. It is mine." Vaelric's heat kicked against her back like a heartbeat. He lifted one hand, and fire gathered there, contained, disciplined. "You will not take her." The rider's horse stamped, hooves striking sparks that died before they hit the ground. The mist behind him quivered, and from that quiver shadows peeled loose, shapes that moved like wolves until they turned, and she saw that they were not wolves at all. They lunged, snarling with no mouths, and met the ring of stones Vaelric had set. Fire leapt. He did not roar it into the night. He held it close, a blade rather than a storm, cutting the first two shadows cleanly, turning the next to ash that fell and melted into the ground. The last slipped past the ring. It came straight for the lantern. Alenya did not think. She thrust the lantern forward to keep it from her chest, and the flame inside surged toward the attacking dark. Light lanced out, no wick, no oil, a sudden striking brightness that felt like a hand closing around her heart and squeezing. The shadow hit it and recoiled, smoking. She staggered, all the air punched from her lungs, the world shattering into white and then slamming back. The shadow dissolved. The slope went very still. She found herself on her knees, the lantern's handle biting her blistered palm, her other hand buried in cold grass. Her chest heaved. The flame in the lantern had steadied again, but inside her something trembled, something hot, like a spark trapped behind her sternum. Vaelric crouched in front of her at once, heat washing her face, eyes wide in a way she had not seen before. "What did you do?" I don't know," she said, and the truth of it startled her. She didn't. She had only answered. Behind him the rider laughed, a sound like gravel poured into a grave. "It chooses," he hissed, voice slick with hunger. "At last." Vaelric stood, putting himself between her and the sound, his shoulders squared, his heat rising until the air around him shimmered. "You will not have her. Not tonight," the rider allowed, almost pleasantly, as mist coiled thick with renewed malice. "But you burn, Keeper, and she burns with you." The horse backed, iron hooves cutting half-moons in the earth. The shroud of fog drew him away, not in flight, but in retreat that felt like strategy. The hoofbeats did not fade so much as relocate, circling, above them in the trees, below them in the low ground, until Alenya couldn't tell from which direction the sound came, only that it was everywhere at once. They stood like that a long while, fire and lantern, back to back against the ring of stones, listening to the night move. When it finally stilled, She felt the trembling in her hands return. The spark inside her gave one small, rebellious pulse. She pressed a fist to her breastbone to contain it. Vaelric noticed. His attention flicked to the motion, then to her face. He looked as if he wanted to speak and could not quite find the words. At last, "You are not merely bound." His voice was hushed, almost reverent, almost afraid. "It is waking in you." "The flame?" she whispered. He nodded once. She lowered the lantern and sat hard on the cold ground. The ring of stones felt foolish and necessary all at once. In the quiet that followed, she cleaned the sweat from her brow with the back of her wrist and stared at the small, stubborn light she held. "Will it hurt?" "Yes," he said, and did not look away. "But not as much as being taken." Something in her loosened at the blunt truth. He did not offer her comfort he could not keep. He offered her himself, a wall of heat between her and the dark. "Then teach me," she said, the words surprising them both. "If it's waking, teach me to hold it without breaking." For a long breath he did not move. Then he knelt again, the lantern's glow carving gold along his scars. "At dawn," he said, as if naming a sacrament. His gaze held hers, steady, almost unbearably steady. "We start at dawn." The forest watched, the lantern burned, and somewhere in the mist, hoofbeats repositioned for the next approach. The night stretched long, every sound on edge. Alenya dozed only in fragments, her head resting against the cool curve of the lantern, each dream broken by the phantom echo of hoofbeats. When the gray wash of dawn finally bled into the sky, it brought no relief, only the knowledge that another night would come, darker, sharper, closer to the blood moon. They walked through the next day in silence. Vaelric moved with a grim set to his shoulders, every scar lit faintly in the sun's pale glow. Alenya followed, her steps steady despite the ache in her legs, because to falter meant to think, and to think meant to remember the rider's rasp, promising he would not stop. By dusk, the moon rose swollen and red over the horizon. The blood moon. The lantern flared in her grasp, brighter than before, and the spark inside her chest pulsed like a second heartbeat. Vaelric's gaze caught hers. He did not need to speak. She saw the knowledge in his ember-gold eyes. Tonight would decide it. They reached the forest's heart as the last of daylight bled away. The trees pressed close, their limbs twisting into shapes that clawed at the sky. Mist slithered low across the ground, coiling thick around their ankles. The air grew heavy, as though the earth itself held its breath. And then the hoofbeats came, not from one side, from all sides, circling, pounding, until the very soil shuddered beneath them. The rider burst from the fog astride his black horse, cloak unfurling like a storm. The void where his head should have been yawned wide, a chasm of smoke and hunger. "The flame endures," he hissed, the words booming through the trees. "At last it burns in flesh. She is mine." Alenya gripped the lantern tighter. The spark within her chest jolted, fierce and wild. Vaelric stepped forward, fire licking around his fists, his heat flaring until the mist recoiled. "You will never have her." The rider's laugh grated like stones grinding in a tomb. Shadows peeled from his cloak, twisting into monstrous shapes, loping toward them on all fours. The horse reared, iron hooves striking sparks as the rider bore down. Vaelric met the charge with fire. His arms swept, and flames roared outward, a wall of heat that seared through the first wave of shadows. They shrieked as they burned, dissolving into ash. But more came, endless, coiling like smoke into bodies. Alenya stood at the center, the lantern blazing so hot the glass cracked. The flame inside leapt with each strike Vaelric made, as though answering. She felt it inside her too, that pulse, that dangerous warmth pressing to be loosed. One shadow slipped past him, jaws of smoke snapping for her throat. Instinct flared. She thrust the lantern out. This time, the fire did not stay caged. It leapt from the flame to her arm, blazing down her skin, but instead of devouring her, it bent outward, lashing into the shadow and burning it clean away. She gasped, staggering, staring at her arm still wreathed in light. Vaelric. His eyes widened even through the chaos. "You wield it." Awe threaded through his rough voice. "The flame has chosen you fully." The rider shrieked, fury rattling the forest. His horse plunged forward, cloak streaming, void gaping wider. The hunger of it pressed against her like a clawed hand on her chest, tugging at the spark within. Alenya cried out, knees buckling. The flame inside her strained toward the void, dragged like a moth to a pit. "No!" Vaelric roared. His fire exploded, a storm that consumed the clearing, but the rider pressed through, cloak whipping, void stretching to swallow her whole. Alenya's strength faltered until Vaelric's hand closed over hers, searing, anchoring. "Do not let him take it," he growled, his voice raw, desperate. "It is yours. Yours, Alenya. Breathe with me. Burn with me." His fire surged into her, and hers surged back, their flames colliding, weaving together in a blaze so fierce the night recoiled. Light roared outward, not wild but steady, a fusion of his forge and her lantern. The rider shrieked, cloak ripping apart in tatters of smoke. The void cracked, splintered, and the horse reared, screaming in terror. The hollow figure shattered in the blaze, scattered into the mist that fled howling into the trees. The ground shook once, and then silence. The fire guttered. The lantern's glass shattered in her hand, flame dissolving into the night air. Only the ember in her chest remained, trembling and alive. Vaelric collapsed to his knees beside her, the glow in his chest dimming dangerously. He had burned nearly everything to shield her. She caught his face in her hands, horror clawing through her. "No, no, stay with me." His ember-gold eyes flickered. "I told you, it would burn." His voice was a rasp, fading. "But if you can carry it—" "I can," she said fiercely, tears streaking her cheeks. "I will. You're not alone in this anymore." The spark inside her chest flared. She pressed her forehead to his, willing that warmth into him, and for a moment the world held its breath. Then his ember eyes brightened. Heat pulsed back into his skin, steady and strong, not the consuming blaze of before, but a controlled, shared fire. He drew in a ragged breath, then another, and his hands tightened on hers. Dawn broke. Pale light filtered through the forest, burning away the last tatters of mist. Where the rider had stood, only silence remained. Alenya leaned into him, exhausted, lanternless, yet alive. Vaelric's scars glowed faintly in the sunrise, his heat steady beside her. He looked down at her, and in his gaze there was something more than fire now. "Alenya," he murmured, her name like a vow. She closed her eyes, resting her brow against his shoulder. "We endured." The blood moon set beyond the horizon. The hunt was ended. And though the flame still bound them, it no longer felt like a curse. It felt like the beginning of something neither shadow nor grief could unmake. If you like this story, please like, share, and subscribe. It helps this channel grow. Thanks for watching.